Good evening and welcome to the June 21st, 2021 Council Committee meeting. I'm Mayor Michelle Dissler. I'll be chairing this meeting. I'll do a roll call at this time. Councilmember Thomas.
Present.
Councilmember Zimmerman.
Present.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Present.
Councilmember Kemling.
Present.
Councilmember Larson Bedell.
Present.
Councilmember Knappen.
Present.
Councilmember Constance.
Present.
Councilmember Chaffee. Before we begin our agenda, I'd like to explain our procedures for public input. If you'd like to speak to the council at any of those times, please come forward to the designated microphone. I'll ask you to state your name and address for the record, and then you may offer your comments so that members of the audience can hear your comments. I would ask that you speak directly into the microphone. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes. No person may speak twice to any one agenda item. Only comments related to city business are permitted. Comments and remarks that are personal, impertinent, or slanderous are not permitted. Disruptive acts are not permitted. After you're finished, please sign the form on the clipboard to ensure we have an accurate record of your name and address. Additionally, comments can be submitted to the entire governing body via email at governingbody@cityofshawnee.org. There's one item on tonight's agenda. Item number 1 is a budget overview, revenues, reserves, and budget wrap-up. We will have staff from various departments who will be providing an update on the proposed 2021 revised and 2022 budgets to include items council members have requested staff to research throughout the budget process. First, we'll have City Manager Sunderman, who will give an overview of tonight's presentations. Welcome, Nolan.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to go ahead and get started again, appreciate you guys being here this evening, and we will kind of continue through our budget preparation and budget recommendation process. So tonight, if you've had some questions about kind of the agenda and kind of how we get there. So first we'll have Finance Director Don Cobby kind of go through revenue and reserves, as well as kind of those council budget requests, including that line item review. And Tanya, our Deputy Parks and Recreation Director, will give some information on the Shawnee Storm and the Special Olympics information that you all have requested. And then as we kind of start to narrow back down, we'll get into kind of the budget action process and again, go through kind of my original recommended budget, Senate Bill 13 and the revenue neutral rate discussion, and then kind of building back on those council budget requests, kind of seeing what's in and what's out, and kind of getting into those council decision points on the recommended budget. So I'll turn it over to Finance Director Don Cobby. Thank you.
I went to the K yesterday, first time in 18 months, and I felt like I should have walk-up music. So just remember that next time. Okay, so we're going to talk about budgets, so we're going to try to keep you awake. First, we'll start off with financial highlights over 2020. As you can see, and we've talked about, we had quite a big change during the year. We revised the budget for 2020 once we knew COVID was coming. And if you remember this time last year, we really had no idea what it would mean. And so trying to be conservative, we adjusted down revenues and all of our, in most of our major areas except property tax. And you can see from 2020 to revised to actual, we gained about $5 million over what we expected. So while that was only about I think we were in the 15 to 18% range, we ended up actually being up just a little bit year over year. As well, we had $2 million of CARES Act funding that we didn't expect. And then from other revenue sources, despite the fact that we lost a significant amount of Parks and Rec revenue, development revenues were up substantially, and we actually came in over that as well. So just to give you an idea of where we ended up for the year, our reserves gained by $10 million. And that was the reason at the end of last year, I came to you and said, well, we better have a plan. That's an awful lot of money. So part of what you'll see in this year's budget is that we spent down in some one-time projects for 2021. That money we talked about in December is in this budget. Here are the revenue growth assumptions, and you can see those actual year-over-year changes that we experienced from 19 to 20, and what we believe we'll see from 2020 to 21. The assessed valuation that we're seeing this year is actually the 22 number for the budget increase of about 6.7%. So we did see a fairly large increase in assessed valuation, and last year, part of the reason we didn't see as much of an increase, there was actually a reduction in commercial last year. I think that was because of some reevaluations and a couple of cases that happened in some specific areas. Motor vehicle tax has pretty much been 2% on the nose, 2 years actuals. And so we're going to stick with that number. County sales tax was down Last year, about 2.9%. Again, that was a win in my book for what we expected. And then this year, we expect to see about a 3.1% increase, gaining back some of what might have been a little bit of COVID impact. But I think the reality is the county has been growing more around that 1% rate. For our sales tax, we're actually up 0.8%. Again, considering COVID, that's a huge win for us. And we're running a little bit ahead this year as well. So we're revising it at 2.2%. And then the out years, we're stepping that down to 1.2 and then 1 carry with the averages over the next several years. For the county use tax and the city use tax, this is where the really big change in our budget occurred. Some of which the use tax, as you know, is basically driven by internet sales or out-of-state sales where the tax has not been paid on those items directly. So those are filed separately. And most of this revenue now we're seeing is through the agreements through the state or the multi-state group that collects these taxes. We collect them. They make agreements to make sure we're collecting the taxes, but there's also been changes in tax laws through the Streamlined Sales Tax Initiative. So I think some of what we saw last year was increased taxation or increased collections because of increased sales. I also think we saw some increased collections, and the state has not given us a number, but we do know that they were able to add some people to their books, one of which is the third-party sales with Amazon and some others. They're not required to, but a lot of those know it's coming. And so instead of owing other ways, they've gotten in ahead of that. So we've seen continued growth over in the taxes, probably over what you would normally see in the actual commerce that occurs. That percentage increases every year. We're still showing that to grow 3% in 2022. And then in the future, it will grow faster. I think we'll continue to see some growth, but that will trend down over time is where we see it match sales tax. The other big changes then, the next three, a liquor tax, I'll skip electric, gas franchise, cable and telecom franchise, and motor fuels. All those in 2020 were down. Lots of different reasons. The market for utilities, liquor tax was obviously from COVID, since that is liquor by the drink and not retail liquor stores. And then cable telecom franchises have continued to decline. It's really the landlines and cable that's going down, while there is some increase that we're seeing from the actual fiber usage, but fiber itself for internet service is not taxed, just if they sell cable or other things over that. So it's kind of a convoluted new tax, but that basis continues to erode. Motor fuel tax last year was down, and that's completely from COVID. Normally we see growth in motor fuel taxes, and last year with the less gas bought, we saw that number drop. And as you can see for 21, we think, and there will be a rebound this year and probably continue next year because it's based on gallonage and not on price. So, and then building permits. When Nolan saw the 75% number, he questioned me, which I would too. I looked, we actually probably saw about a 30% increase because of the fee change that you did for 2020. But that increase is realistic because the amount of activity we had last year, it really increased. So we will see a little bit of normalization this year because that 30% will come out. So that we saw for the fee increase in a year over year, but we still think there will be an increase we still think we'll see a little bit of above the normal. The normal is probably around $500,000 in permit fees, and we're probably on target right now to be in 700,000 or 800,000. And they're a little more, they're not every month. As big projects come in, we had some spikes, but that's the reason for those big up and down numbers, is trying to anticipate about things we know and things we don't know. So we try to get it back more to what that annual trend is over time. So those are the big changes. I think you can see in the out years, we're being conservative as possible, but also trying to make sure we are planning for some growth in our 10-year planning. I went too far. There we go. And the next page is just you can see some numbers and percentage increases. These are the actual revenues that we are budgeting for the general fund. We're just going to focus on that. We can go into some others, but for the most part, this drives everything that we do. So property taxes, the built-in increases down below, you can pretty much see what the valuation increases were because our mill levy rate has pretty much stayed the same over these 3 years. Sales taxes, you can see the bump. Sales taxes and use taxes are put together for those percentages. And then franchise fees and charges and fees are next two big bulk items, I guess, there of the budget. And I just broke out more so thinking ahead, put federal stimulus money in so you could see what we had in 2020. We're obviously going to have some in the out years, and I wanted to have that kind of built in the table. So as we do analysis going forward, we're pulling that out. I think that's important to keep an eye on. So overall, increases in revenue for our revised budget are about 1.8%. As our original budget was a negative 32.4. So not only did we expect some decrease in 2020, we did not show all of that coming back in our initial 2021 budget. I said it was kind of a dip and then slowly glide back up to hopefully by the end of this year, it would be normal. And this is really kind of filling in that hole that we did not dip nearly as much as we thought. And then 2022, we kind of get right back on track with the growth trend. So just for a quick overview, the general fund, what I wanted to highlight here is in our total expenses and revenues for 2021, we spend about $6 million more than we brought in, which is actually less than I thought in December. The $6 million pretty much equals that $6 million in projects that we did, 2 in public works for streets and bridges, I believe. Is that right? And then $4 million in potential stormwater work that are showing us transfers out of here. So with that money out of here, this is pretty much an even budget, and we spent it down one time, which was the goal. For 2022, we're showing right now, with assuming that the mill levy stays the same as was in the proposed budget, a $1.2 million reduction. Typically, we underspend in that $1 million range, so this is pretty close to a level budget. But I still think there's a lot of unknowns on the tax side. So, and on, I guess, haven't got into it, but the dark store theory, while we talked about it in theory in the past, somewhat it is here. We've had 2 appeals in the last 2 years that went back and settled with the Court of Tax Appeals, which had impacts on past years. So I believe last year we had almost a $500,000 hit, and that was because of one company's case got determined last year. This year we started out with another negative tax, delinquent tax. Normally delinquent tax would be a positive. We're collecting back taxes. We actually had to pay or it would be awarded those taxes. So they held that out of our payment. So we had a negative this year as well. And if you look when you get into the detail, you'll see I actually zeroed out delinquent tax collections. Normally that's a $50,000 item or more in like the general fund, and we're not going to see that. So I think we're seeing those court cases go the company's ways, and some back taxes are being awarded. So some of that is on the back of my mind, at least when I'm building these budgets. So overall for 2022, we just showed you the general fund, and the budget as presented is a 39.7% ending balance. We knew that we wanted to be below 40 and somewhere between 30 and 40. This gets us below that number. Public safety equipment and special highway both have large, actually most of these have fairly large ending balances. And overall for all funds, at least all budgeted funds, we have a 52.1% ending balance. This does not include the unbudgeted capital funds that we have. And I believe that would probably, that swings, but I think we were at 53 or 54. So with those included. And just again, just to give you an idea overall from all funds, all budgeted funds, we overspent on purpose $9.6 million in revised 2021 budget. And then we have actually about a gain of about $1 million. A lot of that is the increased revenue from sales tax going into public safety, to parks and pipes and some of those that we just haven't budgeted yet. We just revised those numbers up. So we didn't budget to capture those expenses. And as projects get delayed, sometimes that'll happen. So with that, if you have questions on the revenues before I move on.
Councilmember Knappen?
I just want to zero in on one thing, which is the amount of reserves.
Yeah.
And because we've got a lot in reserve, right? And not as much as we did, but we've got a lot in reserve. So if I'm right, and actually a few of your numbers changed just a little bit, I think, from our packet. If I might be wrong, but
Okay.
it looked like maybe you updated it just by a point or two. But so the general fund in 2021, we're set to have a 42.5% revenue, or not revenue, but reserves.
Yeah.
And then you're projecting that at the end of 2022, we'll be at 39%.
30 right now would be
39.7.
39.7.
So, and we know that the kind of the general recommendation is to have at least 30%. How much extra would that be still in there at the end of 2022?
Let's see. So
Roughly. I'm not a mathematician.
no, that's
but
all right. I
I
mean,
don't put you on the spot. I'm just curious.
10% of 23 is going to be 2.3 million. So, I mean, we're going to be in, all right, 'cause I guess I didn't say that right, but I would guess we're talking a few $1 million to get it down to 30. And I had a couple of where I really lowballed taxes to see, and I was already down around 32%.
Yeah. And I'm not saying I want to get to 30, but I'm just pointing out that it remains pretty high, the amount that we have in reserves, which is a good thing. I mean, until you get to where you're in a really good spot. And then I think you look to see what else you can do with that money or not collect it. So thank you.
Any other? Councilmember Jenkins?
Yeah, I wonder about the slide that's up here right now. You got personal services. And I think we talked about that when we got together, that's more like personnel services.
It is personnel.
Services.
This is built into the system, so we're going to have to go through them. And my goal was to get some of these old.
I just wanted to point that out. We did discuss that, and that's primarily for personnel and cost of staffing.
Salaries and benefits, not facials and massages, as you pointed out. So, yes. So
To
okay.
that point on the personal services though, why is it a few million more in the revised than the actual? What caused that significant increase?
For 2021 over 2020.
Yeah, to go from 35 to 39. And I think there was an increase of like 2.5 million between what we had approved and then the revised.
There's a couple reasons, and one is when we budget for all positions being filled, and so the turnover percentage is typically in that, which is why we end up $1 million or so normally under. I mean, you're still going to have the growth of salaries and benefits and those things driving it, but that's the main reason that number's higher. The other is this year, I think, as you saw in my budget, we had a lot of retirements that are bumping those numbers up. So there's some one-time money in here that I think normally that revised budget wouldn't be that high. In fact, I think from the approved, it bumped up because of those retirement payouts. So when you look at year over year, the 22 budget and 21 doesn't look bad, but revised to actual is always going to look worse. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any.
Okay, quickly, and mainly this is just so that it was in the memo, but so that you know what's here. And I think, as Nolan said, we'll come back to we're trying to outline all the items here and then come back to it so we can discuss. But I think the idea was that we would probably try to discuss at the end as you want to make changes. We received council budget requests, and we have 4 items that came from line item review that for consideration this year, 4 items that we talked about, but for next year, and then the options for the Shawnee Storm Special Olympics and so forth. So I will do the first two items real quickly as an overview, and then I'll let Tanya come up and talk more specifically about Shawnee Storm. The first four items, you had asked for four additional police officers. We put in, and I rounded this, so it's not, I don't think that we just threw a number in there. We took the number for the four and rounded it off to the nearest 10,000. So about $340,000 for four additional officers. As you recall, there's already two in the proposed budget, so that gets us to a total of six. The one thing that's not in here is the additional vehicles. And Sam, who's on vacation this week, but had brought up to me that we normally do one for about every three officers. And when we were at two last year, or two during the budget process, we talked about we probably don't need to do it, but we may need to bump an extra one in a revised budget or so. If we go ahead with six, again, we would probably need to do two, but this comes back to the ability to fill them. So even if we have the 6 spots, if we're not filling those, there's no reason to go out and buy a car to have it sit around. So,
And that was actually one of my questions, is because, I mean, on a normal evening, we might have 7 officers out on the road, and we have a lot more patrol cars than 7. So I think we could add the officers without adding the vehicles at this time. That's my opinion. Obviously, the police department might think differently, and if they do, I'd like to hear that. I just know that we also have a lot that are out of service each shift while folks are in service. So,
and I think that was one reason we didn't put that number in here, because we really just honestly don't know how fast and so forth. So, but I would agree that there's at least some wiggle room. It doesn't have to be there day one.
oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Jenkins.
Yeah, I was the one that threw out the great idea that we ought to hire all the police officers now instead of phasing in over 3 years. There's a number of reasons for that I think make a lot of sense. The first reason is that it takes quite a while to train a police officer up and get him ready to go out to the field. And then once you get him to that point where he's trained to go out in the field, he still needs about a year of seasoning before he becomes at least minimally effective out there. So that means if you're going to hire 6 police officers over a 3-year period, you're really going to not have police officers effective for an 8-year period, essentially. So that's one of the issues. Another issue is that these numbers we based our police department staffing requirements on were based on us having a 48,000 population, and we've considerably increased it from there. Actually, a 30%. Well, gee, that's like a 50% increase if you take it times 48. And we really haven't increased any police. So I think we really need the police officers now. And the sooner we can get them out there and functioning, the better. So it's one of those things where pay me now, pay me later, we're going to be paying for it. So to me, to just bite the bullet, let's hire these folks on, let's get it done. And then having people effective within 2 years, having 6 police officers effective within just 2 years from now, I think that'd be a big plus. And then, this of course doesn't take into effect any turnover or transition stuff going on, because that's always happening as well. That's even more of a reason why we could use the extra 6 officers, because of the turnover we have to deal with, and that would backfill some of that as well. So, I mean, the arguments for hiring all now are substantial, and so I appreciate the support of the council and when we move forward to get that done.
Well, and I would agree too, that in this line of work, especially where it is harder to get hire for right now, experience is a big difference on the situations that they attend to, and you want experienced officers on the street. So I think it counts.
Yes, and not totally tongue in cheek though. Maybe we should send something for the bulletin board up in Portland and Minneapolis and places like that where they seem to be exiting the area. Maybe we get some people already got a little seasoning, perhaps. I don't know.
Councilmember Larson Bonnell and then Councilmember Thomas.
This is just a quick question. I am generally in support of adding additional officers. From my understanding, the west side could really benefit from the redistricting that this would allow. So I am excited about that. I do have a very quick question about the vehicles. I'm trying to remember, do we lease our police vehicles or do we buy them?
No, we purchased them.
Okay, I have no idea how long it takes to actually purchase a police vehicle, but if we suddenly had a need very quickly, we were able to add on staff very quickly, would we be able to possibly lease vehicles temporarily, just to get them quicker? I ask because it's hard to get any vehicle right now.
No, that is, I guess I've been buying police vehicles for a long time. So yes, there's a lead time on it, on new vehicles. The city's in the pattern of purchasing those at the beginning of the year. You guys might remember that we got that long list we get. I think that's absolutely where Sam was coming from, was that he would be able to look and see then for next year's budget if we needed to do it or act on it, have some lead time. But it's not like a fire truck that takes a year, but it definitely takes, I think we're at least 3 or 4 months. Am I looking? Yeah. And I think, and I would agree right now, that's probably even more concerned about the lead time on it. So Ben, do you have something more specific you want to? Okay.
So we have significant lag time as well, because first you still got to do recruitment, you got to hire, you still got to go to the academy. So there's quite a bit of lag time in there to do vehicle acquisition.
That was Councilmember Jenkins. Councilmember Thomas?
Yeah, just to go along with what you were saying, Eric, in our meeting the other day with our police chief, I support adding the additional officers just so if they have someone come along that's great, they want that person, and this person applied after the 2 that are going to be approved or initially requested to be approved were in. I want our police chief to have that flexibility to say, hey, this guy's good or this gal is good, let's go ahead and bring them on, and just have that breadth and that ability to do that. But as Eric and others have discussed, it takes time to get them up and running. It's going to be a while before they're in a car solo. So I truly support the addition of this, and I'm just thankful that we potentially have the budget to move forward with it.
I don't see anything else. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Zimmerman.
So just a process check. As we go through this, Nolan, are you looking for feedback line item by line item from the council as a whole, or what are you looking for here tonight?
Excuse me. Either way, I think what we're going to try to do is kind of get through all of it. Feel free to have discussion questions now. And then as we kind of get towards the very end, I'll kind of come back up and down and I'll kind of walk through kind of these decision points in terms of starting with kind of the original recommended, and then kind of working through and getting kind of formal kind of final direction on these additions or subtractions and kind of what someone.
Thank you.
Feel free to have discussion as we.
Okay. Well, my discussion is, yeah, I'm in favor of the additional officers as long as we hire the right ones.
So in that case, though, would it be better though if you have general, whether generally approval or disapproval in case we get where we run out of time? So do you want us to go ahead and, so it sounds like the police officers are generally being supportive?
Mayor, can I?
Yeah.
I'm certainly in support. I like the idea of providing adequate time to train. I guess for me, the decision kind of ties in with, are we also supporting the other things that we think that our city needs in order to continue providing really good quality service to our residents. So, I'm in support of that along with the other requests for staffing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, that was Councilmember Constance.
All right. The next item, actually, we can probably speed this up a little bit, so I don't mean to rush them, but eliminate the employee cell phone allowances and car allowances, really the 2 allowances that were brought up with council input. And we gave you the cost there. Cell phone allowance is actually not everybody. I think that leaves 5 in was the number that that was included. And then the car allowances, I believe, is everybody except maybe Nolan's contract, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Or do we include yours? And the mayor's? Yeah. Okay. So just so you know how we got those numbers, that was the main thing. So those 2 line items were brought up by council members. And then the last one was contracts manager, which Councilman Jenkins brought up in the meeting the other night as well. Kind of give you a background, when we talked about bringing a new legal department in-house, one of the things that we discussed was the fact that the contract approval process, that eats up a lot of Ellis's time. We've all had to, wait for him to get free to be able to do that. So we felt like that was one of the things that would occur with a new assistant city attorney. Also, though, as I've told you before, our finance department, we have quite a bit of turnover in the next year, and actually have written position descriptions to put more of a purchasing emphasis next year when we fill positions. And so we kind of felt those two went hand in hand. But one option, since it was brought up, would be to possibly just approve the FTE if that's something that you feel like needs to be done. And then we can come back and talk about money later on and whether we actually need to do it. I know personally I'm in such a position of flux with, I don't know what people I'm going to have, what talents I have, and backgrounds, that it's a little hard for me to say, yeah, go ahead and add the position and say we can do this, and we can end up not using it. So however you want to do it, I just wanted to give you a little bit of the background of where we were coming from as a council, or as the staff, and let the council know how we saw that one. So
Councilmember Constance and Councilmember Larson-Mano.
Dawn, I just have a question for you regarding the two proposed eliminations. I would assume that if we remove the cell phone allowance, would there be costs in other ways, landlines, et cetera? I'm trying to understand if there would be an additional cost if we did not have the cell phones, and if there would be an impact on service to residents and people being able to get a hold of staff. And then the same with the car. I know, would we then be paying mileage? Is that more expensive? Have we?
Because there's so many different ways this impacts it. I think that the quick answer is to say on cell phone allowances, it would come down to policy and probably some peeling back. I think we put it in the memo, we've gone to soft phones. I actually don't have a phone at my desk. And my cell phone and my computer can be used as one sometimes if I can get my headphones to work right. And so there are ways that we're doing it to take advantage of VoIP and some other things without having more hardware. Part of that was with the Teams implementation that we did. So I'm not an expert on that, but I know that there may be some cases where we'd have to change that back, and as how it's handled in the field, that might be different. I think there's employees probably that work at their desks that might, once they have a desk phone back, that wouldn't be an issue, but there's others in the field that would obviously need it. So I think however that plays out, surely it's not just going to be take it out and move on, but there would be some adjustments. Employee car allowances, I think it's fair to say that, and we talked about this in the meeting, that was something that was more of the idea, I believe, started as they built, instead of giving people some increases, they gave them car allowances for upper level positions, knowing they would not turn in mileage anymore to help reduce the mileage turn in, but also as a supplement to salaries. That was built into a lot of people's employment packages or offering packages. You're right that we would definitely, those people, if we just took it away and said, don't pay it and pay mileage, then yes, I think that would probably, we would still have to pay some of those costs, but I definitely believe that for maybe, except for 5 or 6 where we might have to buy vehicles, the rest, it's probably a cost savings. The issue then is how much more work does it create? Probably not a lot I can tell you for most department heads, probably not a lot, but that would be something that we would have to run through that process separately. If, as an option, and it is said, if we just rolled it back into the salary, it actually would cost more. If you said, let's just give it to him in salary and then make him claim it, then you actually lose because then you have to take mileage. I don't think that was the recommendation, but that was brought up. So it's, however that's done, there would be impacts on it.
Okay. I don't know if Nolan, if you have any more details on that. I think just from what I'm hearing you say, Dawn, I don't know that I'd be in support of that, just because I still want to make sure we have residents who are able to contact who they need to and get answers when they need to. If we need employees to be able to get all around town to solve constituent concerns, I want to make sure that can happen. So can you shed any more light on this?
I think overall, and at the time, I think for when Shani started this, I was not here, but it's been a transition to what I say, kind of getting out of the cell phone business. Where it's before a lot of cities were providing devices, providing plans, going through that whole, issuing the cell phones. You see people carrying 2 phones. And so it's trying to really kind of get out of what I call kind of the cell phone business in terms of that. And so, kind of, 2 or 3 large things, I guess, kind of on our side is having employees having access to that information. The rollout of the soft phones, I think, from what we've seen at this point, has been a huge benefit. I think employees have been very positive on that. And I think just, again, having access to that information, and also there's a security standpoint for us with cell phones as well in terms of computer access and 2-factor authentication. So there's a couple of different components that we're able to utilize with the issuance of the cell phone allowance for our employees. So kind of a variety of factors in terms of that. Obviously, then just the connection piece, emergency call out, and some of those type of issues.
Councilmember Larson Manel, and then Councilmember Thomas, and then Councilmember Chaffee.
Let me start with a little bit of the easier one first. The employee car allowances, I'm not sure that we have enough information to make a decision on that, only because we don't know what the potential mileage that these people are driving and how much that might be on a per mile basis. And the per mile basis, as we all know, can have quite a bit of fluctuation from year to year because it's based on gas prices and other things. And I think it's a little bit hard to budget with that. But so I'm a little bit, I don't know, ambivalent, I guess would be the word about that. I do want to talk about employee cell phone allowances, though. I am concerned about a couple of things that I'm hearing. One is that we have switched to soft phones, therefore making our employees even more dependent on the devices that they're using. And if we are not providing those devices and they are integral to the work that they have to do here at the city, they should be compensated for the payment that they have to make. It doesn't have to be a full payment, but at least for part of it, based on the work that they are required to do. Because I'm assuming that there are positions that you really can't do without a cell phone. And our options are that we can either give that person a cell phone or we can do the BYOD model. And with the BYOD model, we do have concerns about security. And one of the things that this will allow us to do is have our employees sign an agreement that says if there's a security breach or if your phone is stolen, we can do things like remote wipe your phone to get rid of city data. We can't do any of that if we are not providing some kind of compensation for that phone. Whether $31 per pay period, so about $62 per month plus, a little bit for the extra pay period. I don't know if that's the right number, and maybe that's what we should be discussing. But I think getting rid of this completely can open us up to vulnerabilities that we're not quite, that aren't really clear on the surface of just looking at this and thinking about, they're getting a cell phone allowance. Contracts manager. I think that having the new city attorney take on the contract review duties is a very reasonable approach. We are not a $1 billion organization. And that's a lot of times where kind of the point where I see you really need to have like a contracting department and you need to have people that are overseeing your contract negotiations. This, I think, is a really good in-between model for a large organization that is not a huge, huge organization. My only caution would be, as the person that has been in that role, if you don't have a good structure where you're thinking about contracts and the entire contract and purchasing process holistically, that person is going to be set up for failure. They're going to be blamed for a lot of bad things that happen that really they are not in a position to be able to evaluate. So as long as that person is part of a team that is kind of looking at that whole contract management process, I think that this could be a reasonable model. Thank you.
Councilmember Thomas, and then Councilmember Chaffee.
Yeah, I just want to step back a little bit and talk about the first memo that was sent out to the public and the council and city employees. In that memo, there was a false statement, and that's the reason why there was a new memo sent out. In that statement, it says that Councilmember Tammy Thomas wanted to eliminate uniforms for employees to include police officers and firefighters, and that is impeccably a false statement. That was never stated in a meeting with city manager's office. After some discussion, a new memo came out, and that's what's being provided in the packet tonight. But the first memo was sent out to the public, so I want to publicly state that I did not ever indicate that we want to cut uniforms for our police officers and our firefighters. Absolutely a false statement. And to move on to employee cell phones, there may be some folks that for their job need a cell phone. But I have a sense that there's some that do not need a job for their cell phone. We're here, our employees do a great job. And to the statement being made of, oh, it's going to ruin morale, it's going to take down the culture, that's not the role of a director or a manager. The role is to share the information. The role is to inspire people, okay, this is our guidance, what are we going to do? That's the role of management, not to tell staff and others how they're going to feel. So when it comes to these employee cell phones, some may need them. I sense there's quite a few that do not, because I understand every full-time and part-time permanent employee has access or the allowance of $64 or $62 monthly for those. But I think we need to evaluate that. We're here to be good stewards with taxpayer money. And I feel like we are wasting some. It's nice to have, it's a nice little perk thing to have that. But is it necessary for your job? We're a nonprofit organization, but we're not functioning like one. And when it comes to the employee car allowances, I think it's a very good idea to evaluate how much mileage our deputy directors and our directors drive, because I'm told that's who these folks are. Well-compensated employees. We're a small city. We're not really that big. We're 42 square miles, so I don't know. A $5,400 car allowance annually is a car payment for a lot of people. And is that what's needed here? Back to needed, not nice to have, not a perk, but is it needed? And I think in my line of work, especially when I was employed with the state of Kansas as director, I completed mileage. I kept track of that sometimes, but many times not, because I felt travel was part of my job, because I was in an elevated position. But we can, and it's not hard. I have staff that do it now. In my job currently, I work for a non-for-profit. I do not claim mileage. It's part of my job to travel. And I'm not compensated what you would consider a high compensation. But we have, when we talk about mileage, we could set up a system where people keep track of where they go from City Hall, from their employment spot, and they get paid 56 cents a mile. Not hard. And, you know, over the course of the years, in the past 6 years, that number hasn't changed that much, that mileage reimbursement. And then if you're going to go, it's been calculated that if you go round trip of 75 miles round trip, it's cheaper to engage with the state contract with Enterprise Rental Car, rent a car, fill it up with gas, and claim the gas on your reimbursement. But this is an area, this is $97,000 that we could save. But I don't know if you're looking at it, but 17 times 5,400 doesn't equal 97,000. And I know, you know, our budget, you just said you're not a mathematician. That number is actually 91.8 if you take 17 times 5,400.
I think we adjusted it for a couple of them. It didn't change the total. So,
Okay,
yeah.
That's good. But I do feel like there is a person that deserves a car allowance, and that's our mayor. She's paid minimally, and she's at everything. Drives everywhere, she attends everything. So I would have no challenge with authorizing a car allowance for the mayor. But when it comes to highly compensated employees, we're 42 square miles. I don't see where a car allowance for our highest wage earners is a benefit to the taxpayer.
Councilmember Chalfie, then Councilmember Jenkins, then Councilmember Zimmerman.
Thank you. I will try to be brief. I'll just kind of share my thoughts on the four items in front of us. I know somebody mentioned with the police officers being able to capture any potential qualified candidates, even if we have hired the two that were allowed. So I'm in support of that because I'm confident that Chief Larson will hire those qualified candidates and not hire just bodies that might be in the applicant pool. Contracts manager, I am great with the recommendations there. The cell phone allowances, I know Lisa, you sort of spoke a little bit to kind of more the legal aspects and the protection that we have with security and such. I'm just thinking of it really in terms of efficiency. And, you know, yeah, there could be some folks who don't necessarily need a cell phone to do their job. So then I think we evaluate the cost of, the desk phone and the landline in that case. I just want to make sure that we're efficient. I'm just not sure that the cost savings is going to be huge there in making that transition. I'm just thinking of parks employees and community development employees and police. And there's so many departments where I feel like they are out in the field so much that, I just want to be able to be efficient with the time of our staff. And then on car allowances, I kind of agree that I feel like I need a little more info. Can you clarify the vehicles that we would potentially need to purchase if we went with this? I mean, if mileage makes more sense, that's not a huge sticking point for me, but what are the vehicles that we would potentially have to purchase in this situation?
I think there's we're two in fire that are currently three in fire. And I think we were just at 2 in PD right now if that's, am I right, Ben? There'd be probably 5 vehicles right there.
Okay. So that would eat up, I feel like, that savings fairly quickly.
We need to purchase vehicles.
Go ahead.
So I'll say that this is kind of a bigger conversation, if you will, and I don't mean to drag it out, but this may be something that we want to add to the kind of future review to kind of have more of that kind of for next year's conversation. The reason I say that, because there is some discussion of a take-home vehicle versus car allowance. And so trying to figure out, by the time you purchase a vehicle, obviously depending on the position, could depend on the type of vehicle potentially. And then as you go through that conversation, kind of factoring in, obviously, the purchase of the vehicle, insurance, maintenance, gas that you're paying on that take-home vehicle versus giving somebody a car allowance. And so trying to figure out kind of where is that sweet spot that it makes sense, that it may make more financial sense in order for us to give a car allowance versus purchasing a vehicle for that.
It seems like, say, fire department, those have to be identified. I mean, we have those because that is on a 24-hour basis. So whatever battalion chief is on call, wouldn't they be taking home a city vehicle with a emblem on it that says City of Shawnee Fire Department?
So those are kind of on shift positions, just be like emergency services chief and those kind of things. So do we purchase, and I apologize, I forget the number, $60,000 vehicle that has to be replaced? What is that replacement schedule?
We don't currently do that. We're
We already
just,
have one.
yeah, we're just giving somebody a car allowance
So
instead.
it needs to be so at the replacement point.
And we're going to replace it when it needs to be replaced. I don't understand where you're coming from.
Well, there may be savings essentially kind of in looking at that in terms of purchase of the vehicle, maintenance, gas, that would that position as we transition that makes sense to more go towards an allowance.
This sounds like a smokescreen to me, because right now our police chief and deputy and our fire folks, they drive home with their SUV or whatever this says Shawnee on the side of it. They certainly can take it home if they want to.
So like
I see them parked in their houses. I mean, I'm just kind of.
And so again, I apologize. So certain positions have a car allowance, other positions have a take-home vehicle. And so kind of having that conversation about does everybody that has a take-home vehicle need a take-home vehicle? Does everybody have a car allowance need a car allowance? Similar to the questions and comments that you all made, but from a financial perspective, is there kind of where does that differentiating factor make sense to move the needle? And so I think, what makes Shawnee unique as well is, I think Councilman Larson-Bell asked about leasing vehicles, number of cities, and we've had the similar conversation about transitioning to a lease program. A number of our neighboring jurisdictions do that, including school districts as well as cities. And the issue for us is, as you all know, most of our new vehicle purchases occur in the police department, and then those vehicles transition down. So having conversations about right sizing our fleet, right typing our fleet, and as you have those conversations in terms of the size of our fleet, where does it make sense to have a take-home vehicle? Where does it make sense to have a car allowance? Where does it make sense to just simply pay mileage? And so those are the conversations that we've been having over the last few years in terms of leasing opportunities. Quite honestly, that doesn't make sense for us just by the nature of kind of our fleet replacement program, whereas it makes sense for other cities. So that's why we haven't got into that, where you see a number of other cities, including school districts, use kind of what is the enterprise leasing program. So
Norman, I think when we spoke, I asked you, because the initial number that I read was 18 people receive a car allowance. And I said, who? And the response was directors and their deputies. So aside from the fire department, which I'm like Eric, I think there are cars that, because you see them going home with people. So I think those are present. But aside from fire and police that maybe have someone on call that need to respond from their home, that's one thing. But when you have directors of departments that are not public safety, that's what I'm talking about.
Member Jenkins and then Councilmember Zimmerman.
Yeah, got a number of items here we got to go over. First of all, eliminating the employee cell phone allowances. I sat in that meeting with Councilwoman Thomas and Nolan Sunderman and our finance director and Caitlin. We all sat there, we talked about this. The fact of the matter was, nobody ever said, let's eliminate all the cell phones.
No.
So how we got to eliminate 321 employee cell phones, I'll bite. I don't know how you guys got there. So anyway, we did talk about reducing cell phones because I'm sorry, but you're never going to convince me in a million years that every person on the staff of this city requires a cell phone. That's a joke. I mean, come on, that's not even realistic. We got people that's jobs really you just don't need a cell phone. It's you're holding this, you're shoveling asphalt and filling potholes or whatever, and you got a supervisor on station that's got a cell phone. Not everybody needs a cell phone. It's costing us about $68 a person per month because they got to figure in the 26 pay periods instead of 24. So because it's bi-weekly. But anyway, it's a substantial sum of money. I think we could bring that number down significantly and still have every service that we want to have, all the responsiveness that we need, and we're good to go. So I think that's kind of egregious that every single person have a cell phone. I do about 90% of the city business on this phone right here, and this is my personal cell phone. And I don't use it that much for personal, but I use it for a lot of city business. And I thought one of the things that really kind of caught my attention was with Council Member Lisa Bonnell, when she was talking about the security aspects. Well, hell, let's put a whole crap load of them out there. Now we got more security stuff to track. Okay. Joe Schmedlap lost his phone. Mary Smith lost her phone or whatever. Now we got more phones that we have to worry about the security issues on. I'd prefer to have those phones in the hands of somebody that really does have a demonstrated requirement. I need a phone. Okay. And we take care of that. And we help provide some compensation so they can have a cell phone, which they can use dual use. I'd like that number looked at. I think we can fix this. I don't think this is a difficult thing to fix. I think we can laser focus down on this and determine who needs phones, who doesn't need phones. It's not some blanket deal where everybody in the city gets a $65 a month pay raise for phones. I mean, just the taxpayers got to pay for that. And everything we do in this community should be done through the lens of
Taxpayer.
Is it of any benefit or value to the taxpayer? Are they getting something for their money? And if it doesn't meet that really basic test, then why the hell are we doing it? Okay. I think that's a very simple point to put out there. And I think we all should be observing that every day in everything we do and every decision we make. Now, the 17 employees at $5,500 a year, eliminating the employee car allowance. I never heard anybody say, let's eliminate all the car allowances either. So that's bogus. This is not even straight what we're looking at here in front of us. It was discussed that perhaps we should be doing some management of the number of cars we got out there. And is it appropriate, the number of cars? Does everybody that needs one has one? Do we have some people that really don't need one, that their alternate sources of transportation can be made available at a lot less rate? I mean, I think we looked at the numbers, and in order to spend $5,400 a year, you'd have to drive over 9,000 miles. I don't think there's anybody in the city driving over 9,000 miles in our 42 square mile area. And if they're going out of town to a conference or something, I think you fall back on the option where you go rent the car and you do things according to Hoyle. I think we probably have a number of car allowances we could eliminate. Do we need some of them? Sure. And I concur with Councilwoman Thomas that the mayor certainly needs a car. You drive all over the city on city business, and you do it very frequently. I think city manager is an appropriate perk, and it's in his contract, quite frankly. I think some of the others, I don't know if they need a car allowance or not. I definitely think all public safety officials should definitely have a vehicle they take home with them so they can be responsive. If you're connected in any way to public safety, or you have a immediate response requirement, and that might even include Doug Whitaker of public safety, I don't know, because you could have some kind of sewer break or something like that, cause them to have to go out and supervise that in the middle of the night. I don't know, but I think an analysis has to be done. And I don't think it was presented in a fair manner here. That kind of bothers me that it wasn't presented fairly as it was discussed. Okay. Now, the new city attorney doing the contract duties, I'm looking at a procurement officer. When I brought this idea up, I want a procurement officer. Okay. Lisa, your dad worked with me many times out in the field with FEMA on deployed disasters. He bought tons of stuff for me because, as you can imagine, we buy a lot of stuff out there in the middle of a disaster because a lot of stuff is broken and needs to be fixed. He did a great job. And he wasn't an attorney. He was a contracts officer, a trained contracts officer. That's what he did, procurement and contracts. I'm not so sure that everybody's saying it's an appropriate duty for the assistant city attorney, but I'm not so sure it is. Can the assistant city attorney do that? I don't know, maybe, but that's not their forte in contracts. Can they do it? Yeah, I could probably do it too. I mean, all of us could probably do it with the proper training and a little bit of time and experience on the job. But I'm looking for somebody. When I brought this idea up, I was looking for somebody that has some experience. They've been in the procurement business for a while. They know how to do a good contract that's gonna save this community money, and it's gonna give us the kind of leverage we need over the contractors so that we get the product or the services that we've asked for in that contract, and we got some proper enforcement and oversight. Can we do this? I got real mixed feelings on it. Maybe. We could try it, I guess. And if it doesn't work out, say, geez, that didn't work. We're hiring an assistant city attorney anyway, from the way I understand it. But we spend a lot of money on contracts. We spend basically all the money of this community on two things. People, because that's our number one asset is our folks that go out and do the work. The other thing we spend money on is procurement through contracts, doing chip and seal, or I don't know if we do chip and seal, but doing new road work, going out and fixing these storm sewers, buying vehicles, fire trucks, all this kind of stuff. So pretty much all the money that goes flowing out of here is about half the money flowing out of here is contracts related. So that's kind of a significant position. And I know it would help Mr. Calby out quite a bit if we had somebody on here that could handle that. I think it would help out the whole community. So that's why I was kind of looking at somebody that really an experienced, get her done contracts official that has a lot of procurement experience. So if we go with this and everybody wants to go with this, okay, let's see I guess we could do the old let's see what happens thing. But that's not really what I had in mind when I made the proposal. I had it in mind to hire a real person that's what they do. They're a pro, and they're going to protect this community, and they're going to save us a whole lot of money because we're not going to do dumb stuff, and we're going to do good follow-up and those kind of things. So that's where I'm coming from on the on that new assistant attorney thing. I think we're going to get a new assistant attorney anyway, so that's not really a negotiable item. I think Nolan was trying to combine the two, trying to save some money there a little bit. Okay, we won't necessarily need another staff. We could combine this function over here. I don't know. I don't know if it's appropriate or not. So it's open for discussion, but that's my thoughts on it.
Councilman Zimmerman and then Councilmember Mappin.
So I think I've been a little bit cranky over the weekend since I saw the first agenda, which has been revised. And I'm totally unaware that we had a meeting with 2 council people and 3 of the staff. So a lot of this stuff exposed to me for the first time. We're having clarifications here tonight. There was a list of stuff from increasing employees' share of the cost for health insurance, the whole employee uniform, which is evidently a confusing issue. There's a clothing allowance, which includes OSHA required steel-toed work boots for public works people. That stuff, striking that now kind of, it strikes me as a form of a breach of the terms of employment here. We're taking stuff away that was part of the deal. I don't understand what we're doing here. We had evidently conversations about striking overtime, which is the one way that we maintain minimum coverage.
That was
I
an
kind of,
incorrect statement too, so you were misled on that as well. Sorry.
well, I kind of feel like
But
there's an
hold-
effort.
I hold the city
I
manager
think,
responsible for
I
that.
think, I think I have the floor right
Yeah,
now.
you have the floor, but let's don't be saying things that isn't true.
I'm just telling you what I
Using a
saw.
memo that was pulled back and using that to stand here and go crazy with everybody. But the fact of the matter is, it was pulled back for a reason, because there was a lot of incorrect information in there. So why are you bringing that up and throwing that out at everybody? That's kind of.
So help me understand now that you've interrupted me, help me understand this one thing. There are 3 people in there that all heard the same thing and they all made it into the agenda. Are you calling them liars?
Yes. If
I see.
If that's what
Okay.
it is.
Right.
If you want to call it a liar, or you want to call it a miscalculation or whatever. But let me tell you something, since you've opened the floor up to that, the bottom line is, before that document was ever put out, it should have been shared with those people that were in that room at that meeting and said, did we capture your thoughts here correctly? Yes or no? If I'm putting out executive correspondence and my boss tells me something, before I don't just send it out after I type it up and say, okay, there it goes. I go back and say, boss, have I got this right? We were never given privy to any information that was put in that memo, never saw that memo. And the fact of the matter is, those things weren't said, and I'll hold these people responsible to say, is that what was said? Come on, pony up, because I was there, and that was not said, and I know exactly what was said, and I'm very cogent.
Yeah, I would say let's move forward with what was actually published the second time. There was obviously some type of miscommunication, misunderstanding. And I know myself and I, the city manager, will have discussions and bounce ideas back and forth. And it doesn't mean that I'm stuck on an idea, just, throwing stuff out there. Or what about this? What about that? And that may very well have been what happened. I don't know. I wasn't there. But let's go ahead. Going forward, let's stay focused on what was published the second time. Councilmember Zimmer, are you done? Are you complete?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Councilmember Nappen and then Councilmember Larson-Bonnell.
Yeah, I'll pull us back a bit. I've not said much because I actually thought we were going to go through the whole thing and then have discussion at the end, but apparently we're not doing it that way. So I wish I would have gone to the meeting, because then I could have had my idea up there as well. So just to go through these and then add one. Police officers, I don't think anybody's against adding. We know we need to add. So we can put them in here, and if we can find the right people, then great. I believe what the chief said was that he already had 4 openings, and then they were requesting 2 more, and he didn't think he'd be able to hire that many qualified. So I just don't want him to feel pushed to fill them. If he gets the right person, great, and we can add it in the budget. But I'd like him to hold that, keep our high standard for hiring. And in terms of the cell phones, I think almost everybody would need one. Certainly not the guy shoveling asphalt, but a lot of people will. And I don't think we should take that out at the 11th hour here without taking a much closer look at that. The bottom line is the city doesn't have all the hardwired telephones and everything else that we once had, those expenses. And this is a way to defray that cost and allow the folks to have cell phones. The vast majority of it, I think, do need to fulfill their job. Cars. So, my goal is to have a highly competitive people and be able to hire the best people to lead our departments. And that doesn't mean overpay them, but I certainly believe if you have the right people in place, you're going to be able to attract the talent, and they're going to save you the money, not only in the decisions they make, but in the way they inspire the people that work for them. And so if this is industry standard, and I believe it is, I'm not for changing this at the last minute either. Last thing on what's here, I don't know if we're deciding, but I certainly hope we're going to bring legal counsel in-house moving forward. So I guess whether or not they also take care of contracts is the one maybe up for discussion tonight. But anyway, so given this is my idea, given your presentation, I think what you demonstrated in the takeaway is that we're in an incredibly strong financial situation. And that's due to good management, conservative estimating, and a number of things. And so my takeaways here are things like the proposed budget anticipates the ending fund balance in the general fund to be 42.5% at the end of this year, 39.7% at the end of 2022. Again, I said it earlier, that reserve significantly exceeds the city's policy target of greater than 30%. That's just what is in reserves. Expenditures were under the 2020 revised budget estimates by $7.6 million. That's 8.4% that we saved. So far in 2021, all this is straight in our packet. And so far in 2021, in the first 5 months of 2021, revenue is above projections by 13.6%. Total so far in 2021 show a 10.4% increase over even the pre-COVID 2020 collections. So sales are strong. Use taxes continue to increase in year-over-year comparisons with the first 5 months of 2021, coming in over 28% over last year. And then finally, telecommunications and fiber franchise fees, partly because we made some good decisions along those lines, are projected to be 2.5% lower in 2020. I think the discussion that we should have is it time to lower the mill levy by 0.2, 0.3, 0.4% and reduce the tax burden? If we've got plenty of money, I'm not against this budget. Most everything in here I'm supportive of, but I would be more than happy to make a motion to actually reduce the mill levy by a slight percent, because we're getting to a point where we've got a lot of money in reserves, and I think we can accomplish everything in this budget if we just ask staff to go back and take a look at it, what they might want to cut out, and if they don't want to cut anything out, maybe we take a little bit from reserves. So that would be my addition to what's on the screen. Thank you.
Councilmember Larson, and Councilmember Constance.
Okay, really quickly on the phones, I agree with what Kurt said. I think that the most compelling argument, forget all the security stuff I said, a lot of it is taken care of with multi-factor authentication if you have it installed. But I agree with the point that, I think a lot of our workers do actually need some kind of a phone, whether it's a desk phone or something, they need something. And if we've gotten rid, like literally physically gotten rid of the phones, and this is what they're using instead, that's sort of the point that I was trying to make before. I want to talk briefly again about the contract review. I think Councilmember Jenkins and I are actually on the same page with regards to the contract review. I think that this contract review does need to be part of this assistant city attorney's workload, because right now Ellis does it. This is the legal review to make sure that we're not doing anything bad that's going to get us into trouble. And what I was saying is that I don't want that to be the only person that is thinking about contracts. And I think where they're talking about finance department reorganization, I think that's where you would sort of fill in those other gaps of who is really thinking holistically about contracts and what purchases we're making. And, both of these departments use a similar software, yet they're from different companies. And is there a way that we can just combine? We need somebody that's doing that kind of oversight. I think that could come from the finance department reorganization potentially. The final point that I want to make is if we do decide to move forward on cell phone allowances and car allowances, making adjustments to those, I want to make it really clear that if we're doing that to current employees, we are effectively cutting their salaries. And I just want that to be really, really clear that the average person that's impacted by this will have a salary reduction as a result of this. And I want us to be thinking in those terms, not in the abstract terms of, well, we're just cutting the cell phone allowance. Well, it's actually part of their total salary package. So thank you.
Councilmember Constance.
I did want to say, Councilmember Knapp, and I really appreciated what you had to say about doing things that keep us with industry standard. And, I think when we look at our financials and we're in a really strong position, that's something I'm really proud of when we look at our budget together as a council, as staff. I would like to know, I want to make sure I'm correct in understanding the mill reduction and how it would impact our budget. I believe that in this case, for every 0.1 reduction, it's 100,000 less. Is that correct? And
rounded off.
Around that. And then what would be the actual savings to, say, the average household for a 0.1, for every 0.1? Is that $2? Is that $5? Is that $7?
I think it's $3.2, right?
So it's,
I think it's $32 for a mill. Was that the number we came up with?
32. So that would be, I guess, in my, I really appreciate Councilmember Knappen a lot that you said. I would also say, as we're looking at adding police officers, as we're looking to prepare for potential blowbacks with dark store theory, kind of an unknown economic time, I don't feel comfortable reducing really a 0.1 or a 0.2 if that's going to result in $3, $6 savings for a household, knowing that we would potentially have to take some of these things off. So to me, that doesn't seem worth the savings, just knowing the level of service that people expect and want to have. You know, I know we had so much positive feedback, even just from the Moonlight Market, and there's so many really great things happening and lots of excitement around Valley of Champions, and there's really a lot going for our city. And so to me, that doesn't seem worth it in that particular case for that amount of savings. So thank you.
Councilmember Knappen.
Yeah, I'll just respond to that. So, I mean, to me, it's not how much are you charging per person. That's not the point. The question is, are you taxing residents at the absolute highest amount that you can, or can we accomplish what we need to with the funds that are available and potentially cut the rate for residents? I know a lot of times people don't like to give up a single tax dollar once you start getting it coming in, but sometimes it's okay to give it back to taxpayers. And we're in a situation now, again, where we have plenty. We have a lot in overflow. And I believe strongly that everything in this budget, even if we don't cut anything, they can find a way to make it happen. And with the additional revenues that we have available. So I'd like to, again, put that on the table, because instead of going down line item by line item on really specific things, in general, I'm more in favor of leaving it to our professional staff to make those decisions. And then, you know, we can cut out one or two things or add a couple. But overall, if we can reduce the mill levy a little bit, that's a win for taxpayers. Thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins, then Councilmember Thomas, then Councilmember Constance.
Yes, my comments are in response to those that were just made about the mill levy potential decrease. And I think this is a pretty important thing. I generally support any kind of tax decrease if we can do it. And I think we're going to have a wonderful opportunity to do so with Senate Bill 13. We're going to have to account for those natural increases that occur. And I think those have all been pointed out to us what those are. Just new property that's been brought on board and built that year is now on the rolls. We've got TIFs that are now expiring and the money's now starting to come in. So it's going to add to the amount of property taxes. We've got a number of different possible sources where our property taxes are going up. Also the appraisal, naturally, that's going up every year. So we're getting more property tax in, and we've got to accept that every year as a pay raise, not pay raise, but a tax increase. Okay, I think that's where our wiggle room to come in to say, okay, cost price index is X amount percent. And so let's say that's inflation. We need to take inflation into consideration because our costs are going up. We got to pay a little more for a police vehicle. We got to pay a little more for salaries. We got to pay a little more for health insurance and all these kind of things. So we calculate that part in, and then we still got some money in the black here that that's coming in that's not really accounted for. So we're gonna have to either accept that as an increase or do something. I think that's where we got a little wiggle room with some maybe a mill levy decrease at that point, saying, okay, let's talk about dropping this a half a mil or a mil or whatever would be appropriate for the amount of money that we have that's in the black that we got to account for. I don't know if that makes any sense. Hopefully it did, but kind of complicated subject to try to cover.
We do have
So
process now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've seen what I think you showed us what we had there on that and the differences of what they were going to be, and there was some money that really wasn't accounted for that would actually be kind of just an increase to our income as a city, to our increased taxes, and we may want to discuss that with a mill levy decrease, and that would be a good place to focus it on right there, I think.
Now seems like as good a time as any. I mean, everybody knows, property values are going through the roof.
Yeah.
And that means more taxes for the city. And we don't need as much as we're going to bring in. We just don't.
Councilmember Knappen's comments, sorry, for the record, so when they're doing the minutes. I do want to add though, so City Manager Sunderman has said that they will look at it, but at the same time, I want to remember that when we are looking at that, we are also trying to build 2 new fire stations that are going to probably cost us significantly more than what we had planned on because construction costs have increased so much. And I don't want to put those off any further because I feel like we've already put them off for 2 years longer than I wanted to. So when you are looking at the big picture of cutting the mill, I want to make sure that we can still get these 2 stations done. Councilmember Thomas and then Councilmember Constance.
Just a couple quick things. And Lisa, to your point about a cut in salary, it would be minimal if they will submit their mileage. If this is being called a car allowance and they've got to, for their job, they've got to drive, they can get that money back. So it's just not $5,400 out of a person's salary. If they in fact drive to the amount that would warrant that, they will get that money back through reimbursement. Also, on these cell phones, everybody's supposed to be able to address and respond to citizen calls and that type of thing. I had 2 calls to myself today that came to me from folks within the city, and their first words out of my mouth, I just can't get a hold of anyone at City Hall. Now, did they really call? I assume they did because they took the time to call me and I answered my phone. So I think even if you have, let's say you have a cell phone, you best be answering it because it's to do your job, and your job is to take care of the needs of our people in this city. And it's not to serve each other. It is our citizens. That's our base. Our citizens are why we're sitting here. And we need to be very careful, very mindful of what we do with their money and how we invest it and how we spend it. Because what I've seen, and this is my opinion, I see wasteful spending that could be cut. $3,800 for a breakfast. I mean, to get people to come in and listen to a pitch about their healthcare benefits. Come on, that's wasteful spending. But I think we can do better, and I think we can tighten it up. I love the idea of a mill levy decrease, but totally agree with you on those fire stations.
Councilmember Constance, then Councilmember Zimmerman, then Councilmember Jenkins.
I got my question answered from you, Mayor. I wanted to bring up the fire stations. That's a big priority, and I want to make sure that we are not cutting something that we need in order to invest in that need for our community. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Zimmerman, and then Councilmember Jenkins, then Councilmember Knappen.
So real quick, I'm going to concur with a lot of Councilmember Knappen's comments. Going back to the slide that was up there earlier, his comments about being a competitive employer are very well placed. So does every single person need a cell phone? Probably debatable, but I think that's been a term of the employment. I want to keep it the way it is for now. I'm fine with the vehicle allowance. It makes us a competitive employer. Mill levy, until we get through the storm sewer issue that we've got, and we've got the fire stations built, I want to hold on to that money. I'd love to give it back, but we've got a big bow wave in front of us right now with the storm sewer. So let's get that taken care of first. That's all.
Councilmember Jenkins, then Councilmember Knappen.
Yeah, last concern over the cell phone thing. I have some concerns about how people are going to contact who they need to at City Hall if everybody's on a cell phone and we phase out our landline system. Because right now, of course, you call City Hall and say, I want a building permit or whatever. Okay, you need to talk to so-and-so, and you get passed through to who you need to be passed through to. Well, if everybody's got their own cell phone, how does the individual living in Shawnee know who to call or how to call them and what's their phone number? Maybe you guys can clear that up for me, but it seems kind of crazy if everybody's got their own personal cell phone number and somehow the public's supposed to just know that, what their number is.
We actually still have our direct line numbers that ring to our phones. So when the city phone rings, it rings on Teams.
Right, I understand it, but you're talking about phasing that out, it sounded like.
No, the Teams part of it. So we still keep the landline system. We have a number that's assigned.
That's a very important point. They still got a landline. These folks got a phone.
No.
At their desk? They don't have a landline at their desk?
We have a number that was our landline that now rings to our Teams, Microsoft Teams, which is on our computer and cell phone.
It's voice over internet. So it's like an auto forwarding number.
They're using VoIP, but they don't have a landline. We've got rid of the landlines here.
we've waded into an area I'm not going to answer.
This is very good.
Mel
Kind of,
can.
it's getting confusing. It really is.
Eric, you can have a phone at your desk on VoIP. They can have,
Yeah, I've had phones
Yes.
at my desk on VoIP, so.
you can do that.
Good evening, Mel Bunting, IT Director. We do have a voice over IP infrastructure, hardware-based, physical phone-based. What our vision has been is on mobility. I think the COVID pandemic was a result of that, our ability to quickly adapt and move our organization off-site. The issue or the challenge, one of the last hurdles, is the wire of the voice over IP phone. And so we physically have boxes that run that voice over IP infrastructure. Brought on by the COVID pandemic, we brought in the pilot of the teams with the soft phones. And so what we're doing is we're porting our 742 numbers over into Teams. And so that becomes a software application that is pushed or managed through our Microsoft products. And so inside the Teams application that we're running, we can receive and make calls as though we're physically on a voice over IP phone. So we're using voice over IP throughout the internet to place and receive calls within our organization. So it gives us, what the takeaway here is, it gets us away from the physical phone and allows us to use soft phones or leverage IP-based traffic, cell phone traffic to manage or place and take those calls. So we're no longer wired to a phone to place or receive calls.
Councilmember Napid.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I'm not talking about a reduction in the amount of money that the city would get. I mean, revenues are up. They continue to go up. Property values are going through the roof. We're going to get a windfall from that. And our reserves are very high. In fact, if we don't adopt the Senate Bill 13 language and agree to it, I'm told that we would have to lower the mills by 1.66, which is a lot. So what I'm talking about, we're going to get more money. It's a matter of not getting this much and taking this much more instead. I'm not talking about dropping the amount the city takes in. And, you know, this is all factored in already to the budget with the fire department. I mean, I don't think the fire departments are in jeopardy there, especially with how much we have in reserves. So.
Well, if the cost of building materials have more than doubled, it could very well be in jeopardy of whether or not we can make it happen with the, because we're planning on using the public safety, the courthouse tax. And at this point, I have not seen the hard numbers, but it is of my opinion that tax is no longer going to cover the construction cost at this point, like originally had planned 2 years ago. So I just want to make sure we still have enough to get both done. I am not in any way, shape, or form opposed to lowering the mill levy at all. But I don't want to say, sorry, it's going to be another 2 years because we did it. I don't want to put off again because of the lack of funding. Councilmember Chaffee.
Really quick question, but City Manager Sunderman, I feel like I recall you mentioning that the increase in captured revenue from new properties coming on the rolls, et cetera, as it applies to Senate Bill 13, that our expenses in serving that, our expenditures and expenses outweigh that amount that we would be capturing. Am I recalling that correctly?
Well, I think two items. Mayor, if you don't mind, we have a section in the presentation. So if you don't mind, if we can kind of pause and kind of allow Don to walk through this and kind of what we tried to do, quite honestly, this is, as you all know, Senate Bill 13, this is the first time going through this process. Staff side, obviously, we know from the governing body's perspective. And so we tried to do a little bit of analysis, kind of essentially using the previous tax lid information and calculation. So I'd ask that Don kind of walk through that with you all and then see what questions arise. I think, Councilmember Chaffee, I think kind of maybe your question, and I may be going down the wrong path here. I think it's a conversation of if we're going to have a struggle with kind of capturing the increased revenue from new development and new construction, it then kind of places a burden on the organization in terms of how would we serve those additional homes, additional development, if we're not essentially capturing that increase in revenue with that. So, but I'd ask that Finance Director Cobby kind of walk through this in Bill 13 discussion, if you don't mind, and then we can kind of circle back with those questions and conversation.
That work, Mayor? Okay. So just quickly, because I found my slides here. So on Senate Bill 13, a real quick background to remember, property taxes are only 40% of our general fund revenue, and we're about 43% in sales tax. So that's overtaken that recently. That definitely has an issue. You've all seen these charts before. So Senate Bill 13 does require us the revenue neutral rate, as you just discussed. So the increased property tax revenue, if it goes over the amount in the past, then we have to adopt an excess of the revenue neutral rate, basically take an action says we're going to go over whatever that rate is. Otherwise, we can't, we have to go to that rate or pay a refund to everybody. So just if you want this later, I'll circle back to it. This is just the league put out an example of how it works. Here's the timeline. But to get to the question at hand is if we kept the rate at 26.501, we would collect about 1.78 million more, or I'm sorry, 1.8 million more than we did last year. And so in order to capture that, we would have to increase the revenue neutral rate. And just to note, it says 24.837 here. We're already arguing with the county. They say it's 0.831. I'm sure they don't care about my 0.006 very much. But as we're going through that process, whatever that number is, we would have to exceed that in order to capture that revenue. So for an example, and I think since what we came out of was the tax lid situation, we tried to put this in terms of it. So if we had the tax lid this year with this amount of growth, the things that we were allowed to adjust for were CPI, new use, or new things coming in the tax roll, whether it's construction thing coming off, changes in use, which I think may not be a perfect number because I think they didn't do the analysis they normally do. IRBs coming back on, and then the big one being public safety increases over the previous year. And of course, that's the big ticket item here. That would actually put us over to where we would have been within the tax lid and not had any issue. That 1.4 is such a big number. Now, some of that is just the timing of some changes and equipment purchases and so forth. But that, if you compare apples to apples, we would have been able to do this all under the tax lid without really any machinations. This was straightforward, as easy to get the number this year. So for purposes of discussion, the difference between the 1.7 and all the other items, if you don't count public safety, was still over 800,000. There'd be about $800,000 difference. So however you want to discuss that those are really the amounts that are there for discussion. So, and again, you would need to pass a resolution. We would recommend, no matter what rate you do, that you pass a resolution to exceed the revenue neutral rate, just to pass it and pick a rate above that, because the law has a flaw in it, in my opinion, that says if you kept the revenue neutral rate and then valuation went down, our rate would automatically adjust up at the final valuation and we would have to refund it. It's just, they tried to get the bill through with some things and it hasn't quite been worked out. So the league is recommending that, and especially this year, since we don't have to send out a mailer, that it would probably make some sense. Whatever we do, pick the number, whatever that rate's going to be. But just so you know, it doesn't sound like that's going to be an issue here, but it's something we need to do. We need to set that at the July 12th council meeting, and we have till the 15th or 20th to get, I think the 20th to get it to the county clerk. So that's our first drop dead spot in this process. So are there any questions on these numbers, or does that kind of give you an example of where we're at? When you asked, property tax is not the only thing we collect. And of course, it's not just general fund. So it's hard to say, one thing versus another. We have other sales taxes growing in others. So it's really a matter of how much revenue do we want to have and then setting that rate. So.
I would just like to recap a couple of things that you said to make sure that I understand. It sounds to me like if we were to decide that we are not going to pass a motion to exceed the revenue neutral rate. In some ways, that's sort of a nuclear option. It will have a pretty dramatic impact to our budget and to all of these departments. But we have the option this year of saying, okay, we're not going to agree quite to the revenue neutral rate. We don't even this year have to provide any notice or anything like that. And then we as a council can come back together and have the mill levy discussion, and we could maybe have an adjustment to the mill levy that's not quite this 1.664, but could still be something potentially.
Yeah,
Was that correct?
Yeah, let me say it probably a different way. On the 12th, if you knew that the top rate that anybody was willing to do was 26.501, you can always go down from that rate later on after the hearings or when you set the budget. You cannot go up. So you have to set a cap on how much you're going to go over the revenue neutral.
And again, because the 26.501 is exactly where we're at right now.
Yeah, if you picked where we're at right now, that would be the most we could do, period. Even if the city hall burned down between now and then, and we wanted to raise it, we actually could not. So,
Thank you.
But you can reduce it at any time?
but you can redo when you publish it in July, when you say the county, this is what's going, normally would go on the mailer. Yes, after the hearing and all, you probably do it before the hearing, but after the hearing, you can reduce that rate down. It's really no different. It used to be under the budget law, which is once you published it in the paper and said, we're having the hearing, that you set that max rate. And this really does it twice. We set it for the budget and we set it for the revenue neutral rate. So you can come down from that.
Any further comments on that?
Okay, where do you want to go now? Because we've jumped completely out of order.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Jenkins.
I didn't see it on the slide when we were talking about the cars and cell phones and stuff, because there was another paragraph here that was not on the slide that talked about additionally, council members Thomas and Jenkins requested an in-depth management review of the following items over the course of the next year. And it listed overtime, employee health insurance, dues and subscriptions, and professional services. We just discussed these at some length. I remember talking to Nolan specifically about overtime, and overtime was not to cut out overtime. It was to, let's take a look at the overtime and the way it's managed. I've mentioned several times from this dais that I'm really interested in having some strong internal controls. And so that's more looking at internal controls than it is eliminating overtime. Overtime is a necessary function of just about any organization. So that wasn't the point. The point was, let's make sure we're managing it well and getting what we should be getting for our overtime, and it doesn't get loosey-goosey and we're kind of just putting them people on overtime that maybe shouldn't be. The employee health insurance, that was talked about when we were reviewing that. Dues and subscriptions, we spend an awful lot of money on dues and subscriptions. So I'd like to take a look at that. Maybe we don't need that many magazines. Maybe we need a couple of magazines and we float them around the office, let everybody read them. We're spending an awful lot of money, believe it or not, on dues and subscriptions. And then on professional services, I brought that up and said, wow, that's a lot of money, guys. What are we doing? What's professional services? They said, oh, well, that's all kinds of stuff. And then you started giving some actual what that constitutes professional services. So it was like, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Trouble is that maybe we need to be itemizing those things because some of them are pretty significant expenses. And if you just look at professional service, like, wow, we're sure spending a lot of money on professional services. What are we getting for that? Well, if you know what constitutes professional services, it becomes a lot more palatable and something. And I think that's when we're wanting to be transparent with the taxpayers or anything, it'd be good to maybe outline what those services are. And that way it doesn't look so, holy crap, we're spending $300,000 on professional services in this one department. What in the world is that? You know, it doesn't look good. So it really doesn't tell you what it is. So I just want to be more upfront with it. This is what it is, and everybody's comfortable with it.
And I didn't know, do you want my comments on those other items some other time, or because we kind of just like completely jumped off. So everybody had commented and I didn't know how you want to do this since we're running out of time.
Yeah, so I think kind of what we'd like to go ahead and, if possible, and I don't want to short changes if we need additional conversation, but I think the first one is, so we have the original kind of recommended budget that we've discussed and presented. if there's any issues or concerns with that. The original, my original recommended budget, I recommended 2 officers. It sounds to me like there's consensus to move that to 6, an additional 4 officers. I don't know if you want to take a formal vote on that. The other thing is, and I think it was referenced, our transition with our legal services department. One minor change that I do want to just mention is that we've had a retirement in that. So before we were looking at moving that part-time to full-time in the 22 budget, we would like to go ahead and do that in the 21R budget, just in terms of us going to have kind of this initial gap with the retirement that is occurring. So yeah, and there's actually no financial impact with that change due to the nature of the position. So. And then the additional contract mental health co-responder. Again, we have 1 current mental health co-responder. This would be 1 additional. So we have 2 mental health co-responders, the additional communications assistant position, and the HR manager position from part-time to full-time. So that was kind of the original recommended. Again, I believe tonight I've heard moving the 2 officers from 6, but again, if there's conversations about what's in, what's out in terms of the rest of that recommendation, happy to have that discussion this evening. And then I just had one other item. Again, we can have this conversation another time, but as the 10 Quivira Plaza CID money, as some of you may recall, due to the timing of that CID continued after it was fully paid off. And so we have an idea on what to do with those one-time funds for the CID money. But again, we can push that conversation as well.
Councilmember Constance.
Quick process question, maybe for Nolan and the mayor. Tonight, if we express support for those additional positions, it seems to me like a little bit backwards, like we would have to decide on reducing the mill levy first to know how much we have to budget with. So if we say yes to these as a council, I guess then how does that impact the discussion about whether to reduce? Can you help me with that?
Yes,
I was sort of thinking both would be in tandem because they feel very much intertwined.
And I'll tell you, kind of even internally, kind of having this conversation, kind of a chicken or the egg conversation in terms of having a conversation about the mill levy rate versus then, okay, what are you going to do with the additional revenue versus us? In my recommended budget, it's keeping the mill levy rate flat and capturing that increase in revenue. So if there's a reduction in the mill levy, depending on how much, it could impact these positions or other items within the budget, or to Councilmember Knappin's point, dipping in further into those reserves.
Councilmember Thomas.
Nolan, was there a process? What is with the process? How did the 10 Quivira Plaza CID continue on past its term?
Yeah, so that's actually what was, I think, maybe good and bad. And Don was dealing directly with the state on this. I think it was like one of the first few CIDs that actually ended up paying off in the state. So they really hadn't ran into this issue before. So the state only updates the tax tables a certain time of year. And so this paid off, I believe, at the end of November. And then it was a number of months, I believe, what, five months?
It went off April 1.
Yeah, so we had a number of months where the CID was still being charged to residents. And so it's still being collected. So that money still comes to the city. It's just not distributed to the developer because they've hit their cap with that original CID. So we have, again, as we list up here, approximately $100,000. And I believe this question kind of came up a few months ago. We said we would kind of have that final number with the way collections, and we could work that into our budget conversations in case there was a suggestion or idea on what to do. Again, these are one-time revenue. We have some other rebate programs for both seniors in terms of our franchise fees and different things with the city. And so we thought developing kind of a property tax rebate program for low income may be something of interest. Again, this is just one suggestion. I don't know that we necessarily need a final answer tonight on this, but at least kind of put that bug in your ear. If you like this, we would actually bring back some sort of policy statement and additional program information if this is a direction you would like us to pursue.
So do we have a measure in place now that will stop this ongoing months of collection of a tax that should not be collected?
No, we can't do anything about it. It's completely, we can let them know once we've met the legal obligation on our end, which was November. We told them it's quick. In fact, we told them it was coming ahead of time to hopefully do it. And they said, when it's done, tell us, and we provide them information. But when they went to streamline sales tax across the country, they didn't want to be changing tax codes in everybody's jurisdiction on a regular basis. So they all agreed they would only do it 4 times a year, and they asked for a 3-month lead. So that's why it's completely the state law. It's the same reason our guest tax took 3 or 4 months. It's the same concept. So it's the way the tax works.
I have Councilmember Larson Bonnell, Councilmember Jenkins, and we're at 5 minutes. So I need to know what you need from us before the conclusion of the meeting, because we're obviously going to have to continue these conversations.
I'll pass, Mayor. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Councilmember Jenkins.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. On the slide you were showing with the people we're talking about hiring, in the legal department, you got in-house contract manager, duties of the assistant city attorney and assistant prosecutor. I thought we were talking about hiring a city attorney to backfill for Ellis leaving, or are we putting that off for a year, or what happened there?
No, I'm sorry. Those were just kind of the little tweaks based on the conversations I think we had with the retirement. So that was just the change into what we previously presented to you. Moving that assistant prosecutor was originally would not be full-time, I believe, till 22. So we'd like to go ahead and move that to full-time with the 21R, the current 21R revised budget approval to go ahead and make that position full-time. Again, there's no financial cost to that. And then again, kind of the conversation regarding kind of the transition and the finance department.
But we're not talking about hiring a city attorney in this budget.
No, we are. Yes. So this is just
Everybody else listed. That's
Here.
why it's confusing. We list everybody else.
here's kind of the in-depth that was presented to you previously.
Okay, we didn't discuss all those positions, but I guess we don't have enough time to really do everything tonight, apparently. So
Councilmember Larson Bonnell.
I was going to request that the special needs programming discussion happen at our next council meeting as opposed to council committee.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So then what do you need from us tonight in the next 3 minutes?
So basically, kind of as we move forward at the July 12th council meeting, we would again establish that budget limit and set the date for that hearing and consider that revenue rate resolution again. As Don mentioned earlier, we can basically put that in the memo as the 26501. If there's conversations that you would like to reduce that, then it would be at the August 23rd meeting when they would kind of finalize that amount. So.
Throughout the budget process, staff's requested council members to share ideas, ask questions, provide direction in order to establish a budget limit, prepare a notice of public hearing, and establish a revenue rate resolution based on a mill levy rate of 26.501 for the July 12, 2021 city council meeting. Staff is asking for directions, additions, reductions, and/or changes to the city manager's recommended budget, and that concludes our agenda tonight. So I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion has been made, seconded on this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you.